folks. Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And as the cosmos continues to dictate my trajectory and where I turn in my evolution as a broadcaster, it is a high honor to introduce my next guest, an acclaimed psychologist and psychiatrist, and a guy who was very close with a band that has been a spiritual guidepost for me throughout my time, even though I never saw them live, and the band known as the Grateful Dead. Dr. Ross Ziegler, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. Let me correct you right away. I'm not. I was a neurologist, not a psychiatrist in primary care, medical doctor, not psychiatry and psychology. But that's okay.
You were never in either of those.
Well, it's a board of neurology and psychiatry, but my field was always neurology and primary care medicine, and but the Grateful Dead connection is correct, so let's just go with that.
All right, so let me ask you something, because I'm producing a documentary on Stan Getz, who I'm sure you know.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and this is a guy who the melodies would flow out of his horn like the most beautiful things in the world, and he was somebody who not only was a complete drug addict and alcoholic, but also had serious mood disorders. And I just wanted you to talk, as a fan of music, as a professional, a doctor, if you could talk about the nexus of genius and addiction and how it relates to the artists.
Okay, that's I could probably, if I publish, to get a PhD on that one. But let's first of all, Stan Getz was a local guy in the Palo Alto area and actually did get sober towards the end of his life.
You're darn right about that. You're darn right. He was drinking Chinese seaweed juice for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really it's heartwarming for me to see someone who gets sober. The genius, and the addiction is a it's a disease, and it's actually it's a neurological disease. It has brain location. It has a lot of genetic correlates. Not that it has to run in the family, and it's like an allergy in the sense that it requires not just a predisposition but exposure to the stuff. And in our culture, we are exposed to all kinds, especially coming up in the 60s and 70s and whatever, all kinds of mood-altering substances, alcohol and other drugs, and so some people, their biochemistry of their brain, it metabolizes it differently. In fact, it's interesting because I in the late 80s and 90s, I became a member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and so there's a fallacy about creativity necessarily being enhanced by altered states, and it also and the drugs are different. Some of it is just escapist, and in animal and human behaviors, the hardest behaviors to extinguish or one is a positive reward from something. It is hard to get rid of if you get that. But even more profound, as far as trying to eradicate it, is the removal of a negative reward. What I mean by that is that you can train rats to do all kinds of things, but bar pressing and so on, by giving them food pellets, and that's a positive reward. However, you can also put rats on an electric grid that gives them a shock and train them how to stop that shock, and that is a more profound link And so, in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it describes alcoholics in their exquisite ways, and it says restless, irritable, and discontent. Not everybody labels it that way, but if you're feeling some degree of social anxiety or whatever, and then you stumble upon something, and because of peer pressure, social context, or whatever, and it relieves that feeling, that's a very profound reinforcer to repeat that behavior. And I also think you can look at addiction, and it may come to this sometime in the future. If you look at the autism spectrum, the most profound degree of autism is completely involuted. People are in a world by themselves. A really exquisite example of that in the context of your show is Tommy by The Who.
Right.
You can't hear it, you can't feel it, you'll see nothing, no one. If you move along that spectrum, you get to Asperger's, which is that they don't like that term that much anymore, which is very functional, but there's social inhibitions. In Silicon Valley, where I live, there are a lot of people who are running companies who are brilliant at coding, brilliant at inventing, whatever it is, and are a little awkward and dysfunctional at the Friday evening, beer blast for the companies and so on.
No, I dig.
To say the least. And so, if you extend that spectrum hypothetically on a graph, again in Alcoholics Anonymous, it says selfishness, self-centeredness. That is the root of our troubles. That there's probably a little bit of a rent, or actually we haven't located it, but a neurological or neuropsychiatric rent in terms of connecting with people. And you hear the story often, I had trouble asking a girl to dance, whatever it is, and I had a couple of drinks, liquid courage and so on. And if that is removed, or if you have some degree of stage fright or whatever, that is a very potent reinforcer. There's a story about, you remember, it's way before your time, but Gary Moore.
Sure.
And they had the Gary Moore show on TV and whatever it is, and there was he had been sober for a long time, and there was someone else was one of his guests, and before going on stage, the guy takes a flask out and takes a nip, and he offers Gary, and he says no, and the guest says, "You mean you're going to go out there all by yourself?" So it's that sense, and a lot of the artists have a degree of performance anxiety, and they also they get put on a pedestal. I think this is a part of the Grateful Dead situation, that I think Jerry has talked about, is, you get put on a pedestal, and you humbly step down, and you get put on the pedestal, eventually you get tired of stepping down. You just leave it alone. But the expectations, that are placed upon you are great. And so I think there is genius without the drugs. There is genius where there's an escape from that. Perhaps if you want to get specific about drugs, I was at a Grand Rounds talk in medicine. You have guests, and they give a little bit of a lecture to the medical staff, and it was Ram Dass. And Ram Dass, after years of doing his thing with Leary and everything, got involved with help, death and dying and hospice kind of stuff in a very beautiful way. And he's written about that too. But he gave this great talk, and afterwards, a few of us docs went up. I was a resident, I was young, and we said, Ram Dass, do you think LSD is responsible for where you are today? And he said, absolutely not, but it saved me a couple of 100 years.
Okay, so you are riffing, and I am loving this. One thing I want you to think about in the back of your head is the idea of, even though you're not a musician, with Getz, I just spent 5 days at at Shadowbrook in Irvington, New York, which is like this 23-room estate. His second wife is still alive, and she would say that he would come home from Birdland, and after playing with Lester Young and Coltrane and Dizzy and these guys, and they'd be high all night, and he said, hey, he's like, Monica, we talked to the gods last night. We talked to the gods. And then they'd put on a tape the next day, and it sounded terrible. So there's this idea of, from a musician's point of view, being able to play transcendent music, or only being able to play transcendent music with drugs. And I wonder how you would counter that, because I'm sure that within your field, within your practice, that there are people that would say, well, I can only connect to the gods when I'm getting high.
But that's the illusion of the drugs. That's the false message that they give you. Talk to Eric Clapton, who's sober. Eric is pretty open about his sobriety. He opened Crossroads. Everyone knows the guitar Crossroads, whatever. They don't know Crossroads is the name of a treatment center we started.
Mm-hmm.
So that the clear-headedness of sobriety is helpful, but the idea, once you get engaged in that, some of that thing with the drugs is not unlike the baseball players who get on a hitting streak and won't change their underwear.
I thought you were going to go with steroids on the baseball players.
No,
yeah.
I'm just
right. That's right. It's a very interesting analogy, actually. The superstition.
Right. Well, yeah. And if things work that way, but it's that breaking through. But a lot. I mean, some of the most amazing. I went to Grateful Dead shows. I started in 1970. I was a freshman at Stony Brook.
Dude, that's where I grew up. Do you know I was born in there?
I didn't know that.
Dude, my parents still live there. I mean, my dad.
It's a beautiful area.
I can't believe that was a hotbed of radical activity back then. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So my first show was 1970, and I went consistently through Jerry's death, and beyond. And so, and being close friends, I could tell you some of the most amazing shows. Everybody was really straight, and years after they really stopped taking acid regularly, the crowd still attributed everything to they would assume things like that.
Right.
So I don't, the other problem is if you have the disease of addiction, you overshoot. If a little bit of something chemical causes you to overcome whatever stage fright or other weirdness you might have, taking too much becomes a real problem. I mean, there were shows towards the end in terms of the Grateful Dead where Jerry's chin was on his chest. I mean, it's just that I just wondered how his neck could handle it. It was just kind of like, okay, whatever, wake him up and we'll keep going. And I think that's true of a lot of artists. The drunken things, so that it becomes out of control.
That's right.
But that's not true of everyone. Some people, have a little bit of a buzz. Part of what you were talking about also, again, I guess I'm just flying around with stuff, but I was unaware until and most of my Grateful Dead experience, and most of the reason I had such longevity with the band and I was on such good terms, is I preferred to be in the audience than on the stage. The sound was better.
I love it.
I'd be at the board. I mean, I had access to all areas.
Oh my God.
But so many people are manipulating to get in the scene, whatever that scene is.
Right.
I sometimes think of Greatest Story when Bobby says 1 in 10,000 that comes for the show.
Oh man.
The others either want a safe place to hide or just want to be in the scene. But anyhow, but there were many times, for one reason or another, where I was on the stage, and the energy, it's loving energy that was directed towards it. It was clear to me, no, that wasn't directed towards me. But it's palpable. It's like a wave. It was as undeniable as the wind. It was profound. And so it's at the end of the show, and I rode home. I rode with them. Rode with them a lot, which was a great thing. You know, you get in the rule was you get in the van before the encore, because when the encore's over, they'll run in and they'll get in the car and we'll leave. You know, people in the auditorium yelling one more set, and we're already calling room service from the hotel.
I love it.
But,
I figured that. Okay, so you got it. You were in the van during the encore.
Right, yeah, and so then sometimes, you know, it was Bob O'Reilly, so we all kind of step out of the van and hear it from the back. But the point is that you would hear, they would be so pumped up. The performance and the adoration of the crowd, which was very legitimate, you know, and very special in terms of the Dead, because the crowd loved them like you love a favorite relative. It wasn't, you know, the Rolling Stones crowd, they have a great appreciation for the Stones, but they wanted a piece of them. You know, it was like, you know, Mick Jagger go out and his clothes could get torn off because somebody wants a souvenir. And the Deadheads were not, they really wanted more to give. There was, anyhow, and that's, that sense, that energy, when you get back to the hotel, you want to do something in order to go to sleep. I think that feeling is what was responsible for Frank Sinatra performing years after he lost the magic that he had on stage. You know, and Elvis is a really good example. Someone who had a lot of talent and gave way to the drugs.
Right,
but
right.
Bill Graham tells a great story that he was doing a benefit concert for Native Americans. And so I'm losing my mind here.
No, you're doing great.
Who played the Godfather?
Oh,
the actor.
Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. So Marlon Brando was a very big supporter of Native American thing, and he was on stage to give a little talk with the crowd. And he says to Bill afterwards, he goes, "That's amazing." He goes, "All those people, they're not extras." And he felt that, because most of his career was not performing live, especially in front of thousands of people. If he did something on Broadway, it wasn't like a rock crowd.
Absolutely.
But so you know, I do believe that a real addictive sense of performing is that energy that's directed towards the stage. But I also feel just like you know, if you're all high on coke, at some point you want to do something to come down. You know, in fact, they used to, years ago, they had ads. It was a treatment kind of thing. It was called Coke Enders. And I said, my idea of Coke Ender was Halcyon. You took enough of those, and it ended whatever you were doing with Coke. And
well, Ziegler, listen, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice, and you brought up Ram Dass earlier. So this isn't Ram Dass, but I want you to take a listen to this, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
An article, I think it was in Harvard Theological, something called the Good Friday Experiment, which Tim Leary and a guy named Walter Pankey had conducted on Good Friday in, I think, 1960, something like that, where they had taken a bunch of grad students and put them in the chapel at Boston University for the day, and had given half of them psilocybin and the other half niacin. And can't remember what else they had in their placebo cocktail, but it would definitely get you into an altered state, not necessarily what you'd like.
Right.
You'd know they'd given you something. And the interesting thing was that, without exception, the ones who took the psilocybin had a profound religious experience. They all felt that they came into the presence of the holy, and none of the ones that took the placebo did. So I wanted some of this God drug if I could get some of it. And it was late, so Leary and company didn't want to accommodate me that particular night, but they turned me on to a friend of mine, a friend of theirs at Westland, who was more than happy to do so. Very shortly thereafter, and we had an institution at Westland at that point. One of the ways in which Westland was spending all its money was that they had something called the Curry Concert every Friday night, where there was a wonderful old farmhouse out in the woods in Connecticut. And they had an ethnomusicology program that was second to none, and they had in residence Ravi Shankar and Naraswamy, Nayasar, God, I can't pronounce his name, and Ali Akbar Khan, and two or three other, really significant classical Indian musicians. I went to that, and there was my friend, and he gave me a God-feeding dose of LSD, and I sat down and started listening to the music until I became it, and then transcended it.
All right, Dr. Ziegler, you know who that is?
I don't. I know the story of the LSD thing. I don't. I mean, I run through a lot of people, but it sounds like one of the pranksters. But it sounds like I don't.
Well,
really
I mean,
know.
no, it's probably a dear friend of yours, John Perry Barlow.
Oh well, I know Barlow. Yeah, I wouldn't say a dear friend. I mean,
anyone in the fan. I mean, all I'm saying is
right. Yeah.
Yeah, you dig, and
his voice sounds a lot deeper than the last time that I heard him. It sounded a great recording, but yeah, he was very interesting guy. He and Bobby grew up together.
Well, what I wanted to ask you specifically about, because you saw this evolution as a doctor and also somebody that was on tour and very close with the band, the Grateful Dead, is that the evolution of the drugs changed. And I wanted you to talk about specifically your understanding of not the April experiment, but the idea that at one time in our country, Sandoz acid was legal. It was you could go to the
Right.
League for Internal Freedom. Dave Getz from Big Brother told me you go there with a card similar to medicinal or marijuana today,
Right.
and you can get tabs of government-made LSD. And we've been talking about overshooting, drinking too much, doing too much coke. But can you talk about legal LSD and what your research has shown as it relates to how you can connect to the multidimensional self? And then ultimately how it spurred and made the Grateful Dead ultimately the most unique touring band in the history of the world.
Okay, you asked these great questions, and
Thank you, brother.
that would require volumes to answer. For one, the LSD. It diminishes the ego. It diminishes that sense of self and enhances that sense of connectedness that we really are all connected. And on that level, I think one of the many miraculous things about the Grateful Dead is the connectedness that the band members had with each other while playing and with the audience. I mean, regardless of whether they were high or not, but I think it developed. The walls came down with that. Now, one of the properties of LSD is synesthesia, which means that it's a mixing of the senses. You can see a sound.
Absolutely, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Didn't Jerry and Mickey both have synesthesia though? They both had that anyway.
That I don't know.
Okay, go ahead. I know exactly what synesthesia is, so go ahead.
Yeah. So the senses are mixed. That sense of connectivity. It's really sad that LSD was eliminated even from areas of research, because Bill Wilson, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, use LSD at one point. It's in the book Pass It On. He thought it was so miraculous. He thought it would help precipitate spiritual awakenings in alcoholics, which is what Carl Jung explained is helpful for people getting sober and so on. And I got a friend, someone actually trained with me in internship and residency, Charles Grobe, who's doing research with LSD and hallucinogens in cancer patients and terminally ill patients.
Really? This is absolutely essential for humanity. This is essential for humanity. So, I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, it's so ridiculous but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Bill Wilson, again, speaking of Stan Getz, the first time that they got him to Alcoholics Anonymous, they couldn't shut him up, and he was the only guy they ever took at Hazleton to actually get a drink to get him to shut up. So, I mean, but you're talking about Bill Wilson was talking. He actually implemented giving LSD to cats to have.
Well, he wanted to. He and I was friends with Dr. Earl Marsh. He's no longer alive, but he was close friends with Bill, and he was the one who helped get the acid from Sandoz. And Bill thought it was so great that he wanted to turn his wife Lois on. She wasn't an alcoholic, and she had a heart condition, and he thought, well, it might be worth the risk just because of the openness. I mean, it just.
I did, man.
But there's no. I can't explain.
Yeah.
I can't explain. An LSD trip to someone who's never had one. It's like trying to explain a helicopter to someone that's never seen anything that's even flown, an airplane or anything. It just,
right.
It's one of those you can't explain it to those who haven't done it, and those who have done it, you don't need to explain it to them. But after a certain number of times of opening to do Huxley, the doors of perception, or whatever it is, it's not necessary. I myself got sober in the late '80s and spent wonderful times with the Grateful Dead at shows, and I was not the least bit handicapped by not tripping, in my sobriety. But I think my entire life would have been diminished had I not had all the experiences with the acid up until that point.
Well, wasn't that what Ram Dass was saying too?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
It just. I had my father was a college professor, and I had a discussion with him once when I wasn't a difficult teenager as far as being radically rebellious, but I was a thin ice player. I did very well in school and all that stuff, but I dabbled, if not.
Were you growing up in Stony Brook or Port Jeff?
I grew up in Rockland County.
Oh, you grew up in Rockland.
Next to Westchester.
Right on. Okay, so you were just a slacker, basically, genius slacker kind of cat.
I wasn't even a slacker, but I mean I was sort of a partier. But I was a college freshman in 1970, so I took advantage. I mean, I didn't think of drug use as I thought of it as plumbing the frontier of psychopharmacology. I mean, just not that I didn't get really fucked up at times, but the point was that it was an intellectual pursuit. Anyway, my father was concerned about this and that, and he said, this is a funny story. I'll tell you the story. I went to medical school in New York, but before that acceptance, because I really wanted to go, my family wasn't pushing me. We went to Guadalajara for an interview just as a backup because I didn't believe in like what else do you want to be when you grow up. I thought it was a question. I answered it when I was very young. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a doctor. And I didn't. The second choice thing didn't cut it. I certainly didn't want to be a dentist. That wasn't an alternative to being a doctor to me. Anyhow, so to go to
Guadalajara
to interview at Guadalajara, they had a whole list of things you needed, a crazy list of, from every school, from elementary school on, and a letter of financial solvency to prove you can pay for everything, and diplomas and this, that, whatever it might be. And everything had to be notarized, which in those days was a quarter, and legalized, which means you had to go to the Mexican embassy and pay $8 a document to get everything completed.
Such a drag.
So the family was the whole plan. We were taking a whole family vacation to Guadalajara. We were going to leave in 2 days. I had completed the collection of all these documents, so my father was going to drive me. It was about 45 minutes into the city to the Mexican embassy. We had an indoor pool and a sauna at home and everything. I turned the sauna on so it would be nice and hot when we got home. And I did the thing in the Mexican embassy, got everything done, and like Mission Impossible, I had nothing to do but pack for 2 days, which was very easy. So I went in the bathroom of the embassy and took a Quaalude and got back in the car with my father. And we would have been home in time to play in the pool and everything, but it was during the gas crisis. He decided to get online at a gas station on the Palisades.
Oh, no.
So we're sitting on his line, and I'm just getting pretty loose.
Yeah.
And, and I asked him for some change to buy some Twinkies. And then he said to me, he goes, I'm concerned a little bit about the drug usage. I said, well, what? He goes, what do you do? And so this point, I said, look, I said, I can keep this conversation pretty short. I've never used a needle. Everything else I've done, everything else you could think of, I've done. So we don't have to go through the list one by one and everything. And he said, well, do you sniff cocaine? And I said, well, I used to sniff it. I said, now I snort it. And so then he goes, well, what concerns me is the hallucinogens. And I said, well, do you know what concerns me? I said, I know we owned he was a physics professor, we owned a day camp and everything. I said, I know what concerns you, because the non-swimmer doesn't drown. It's the novice swimmer who goes beyond their capabilities and drowns. Because that's what you're concerned about, is that, I don't know, limits and everything. I said, let me tell you something. Of all the drug usage I've had, the most cogent argument I've ever had to not take any drugs is under the influence of LSD.
Wow.
I said, it is a trip. It's such a perfect euphemism. It's travel. Travel is broadening. It's educational. Sometimes you hit some turbulence. I didn't believe. I always believed in the round trip. Wherever I would go, I really didn't have any bad trips. But I had such a good life. I was just. But I used to take very large doses, so I couldn't think in words to experience that side of the brain. But it's such a profound experience that everything else is just a sensation. Cocaine or whatever, or pot at those days. I lost my taste for pot a long time ago.
It's interesting. It's so interesting. I love talking to Ziegler right now. It's just so amazing. I mean, you mentioned it's so eerie. It's not eerie. But the ego deflator, that was the major point of the pranksters. What they talked about with the acid trips was that it completely kept your ego in check. And I wonder, I mean, for the Grateful Dead, would you say that they? Because it's funny, they would play, like in Eugene in like '83 or something, and you'll see people say, "Oh,
I was there."
Oh, you were there, of course. So Kesey opens up and says, like, he's like, I tried to get Garcia to change that black shirt, but it saves him laundry bills, and like it's just a hysterical intro, and then they bust into a stranger. But someone below's like, "Oh wow, the dead, Kesey must have dosed him that night." I'm like, there's no way that those cats were still dosing in '83. But I'm like, was there a definitive cutoff when they gave up tripping on stage or just doing acid in general?
No, first of all, there's not a they. Each one was individual.
Wow.
And there were no band rules. There were eras when there was, if you read in the books that everybody's written, there's more, when coke was more prevalent and this was more prevalent, but there wasn't any kind of band rule or idea about what to do, and occasional dosing came up through the 80s and everything. I'm not sure particularly for Jerry, but yeah, I think by the 80s, there wasn't a surreptitious dosing. If somebody was taking something, they took something that they wanted. You know, it wasn't like in the old days, whatever it is. And in fact, Mountain Girl and whatever, they were always. She would come up and give a very poignant warning and plea to the audience. I remember I was at the Greek or something. Be careful. There are people. Some people are spraying water bottles that have acid and everything. Don't let people do that to you, and so on. And that's. I mean, I think of LSD as a very holy thing, but I think it's really. It's cruel to give it to someone surreptitiously.
So, and I mean, when
you say dosed him, you just mean that he provided it for him.
Well, I mean, some people will say, what I'm talking about is like David Garibaldi from Tower of Power. Tower of Power had a record, their record party at Mickey's Ranch in '73. I'm not sure if you were already in there, but I mean, literally, Garibaldi saw what was happening, that they were dosing all the food, and the acid wound up in the coffee pots, and there were 9-year-olds drinking it. So I mean, again, there's a fine line. It's just like I look at that band, especially in the early 80s. I'm talking about before the coma, which is the only time period that I listened to of that band. It is the most ferocious sounding music I've ever heard in my life. And and it's also a little bit tortured, but I say to myself, the trust between these guys on the bandstand, it all traces back to LSD in my non professional opinion. It was this idea that where they'd be going off for 20 minutes. This is going back to the 60s, obviously, but and just holding on for dear life. And they knew that their brothers were also hanging on for dear life, and they survived it together. I mean, to me it is a fantasy because I never saw them, but you were right in it, and it's just it is a fascinating thing because. I look at now, what do we have? We have huge opioid crises, and we have all these other kinds of things. And I look at it and I say, and we have so much sort of, let's see what the right word is here, inauthenticity, lack of authenticity at many levels. And I often think that microdosing would be, I think a lot of square cats, here's the point, Ziegler, I think a lot of square cats did get dosed unknowingly back in the day, and it did provide introspection for them. And I think it would be a very useful thing to be happening now in our culture, because I just see a lot of people that they can't see the forest through the trees now. And it's one reason we're just muddling around in sort of this sort of dystopic time. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, because LSD is interwoven with the whole Grateful Dead story. That's undeniable, but the cause and effect thing, you really can't. There's no control group. Right. There's no example. I'll give you. Maybe this is a good example. It's a good story. When I was, I had a lot of friends in medical school. In fact, I gave the valedictory address, which was chosen by the classmates instead, because we just had pass-fail honors. We didn't have grades, and I went to school in downstate in Brooklyn, and it was a big school. And one of my closest friends in school, we'd got high together here and there, but I always wanted him to do hallucinogens, eat mushrooms, acid, and it was never a good time for him. And his name was Gary. And I was moving to San Francisco, where I did my internship and residency in medicine before I moved down to Palo Alto to do neurology. And so we drive my car out. I had a Citroen Maserati. It was a really exotic thing in those days. So we're driving it out, and I wanted to show some sights and get the car out. My parents, we had already flown out. I already had an apartment. I already furnished it. And Gary's internship was starting 2 weeks later than mine, so he can come out and then fly back, and he was going to be in Florida. And we get to Bryce Canyon, which is a spectacular, magical place. I don't know if you've ever been or not.
But I know it well, yeah.
You should go. Anyway, and we're going to be there for like the afternoon and sunset, and then in the morning, and then leave. And I start eating from a bag of mushrooms like it's potato chips. and Gary says, oh, I'll have some now. And I said, no. I said, this place is so magical and otherworldly that I don't want you to attribute the experience you're about to have in the next several hours to the drug. I want you to be able to see how magical it is clean. And when we get to San Francisco, I'll give you all the hallucinogens you want. So, the Grateful Dead is the epitome of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
That's right. That's right.
And not that each individually isn't a spectacular musician and a kind of an enlightened being altogether, but together they create. And that was the thing I used to. If you watch videos or anything, there were times when Jerry would be looking at his hands, playing the guitar, and you see a smile over his face, and it was, to me, I read it as like, holy shit, where did that come from, kind of thing. It was like he was surprising himself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just is that they were the best of all concerts is when the band and the audience we all just went somewhere and and we couldn't suss out exactly what energy was coming from where. It just went. And so there was that, but I think if you do an interview with someone who's really a musicologist, I mean, some of the things that Bach does on the keyboards and so on is not unlike the Grateful Dead things, and certainly in jazz. I mean, it's just that. The point of the Grateful Dead was they were not rock stars, or they were accidentally. They were musicians.
Morning comes, she follows the path to the river shore.
I saw the Dead at Stony Brook. When I was at Stony Brook, there were a few phenomena went on. One, in 1970, it's a big, beautiful. Well, you know the campus if you know the area.
Oh,
Beautiful
I
campus.
can't even imagine back then. It's gotten built up a lot now.
Right, but out of all it seemed to me, out of all the windows as you walk around campus, what was coming out of the windows as a college freshman was Traffic, John Barleycorn Must Die, Santana, Abraxas, and the Grateful Dead, American Beauty, and Working Man's Dead, which to me has always been a double album that they just put out in two separate albums. I just think of Working Man's Dead and American Beauty as a anyhow. That's the sound. That was the background sound walking to class and whatever it was. I'm sure there are people listening to other things.
Maybe like Big Pink, the band, Big Pink or something like that. Music from
Big Pink, and but anyhow. The other thing about this is kind of an irony is when I was in high school in Rockland, my mother didn't let me go to the Fillmore to see concerts. I will get to your answer.
No, it's fine. I love so you're like 68, 69. You weren't allowed to go.
I wasn't allowed to go. It was, whatever it might be. I had friends that were going seeing the Grateful Dead, and their name at those was a little bit of a turnoff for me. I didn't, it was whatever it might be. Because Grateful Dead at that time didn't sound like Uncle John's Band. The name didn't conjure things like Uncle John's Band.
I did, man. I did.
And Sugar Magnolia, it conjured. I was thinking, I don't know what. Anyhow, so I go to Stony Brook. It turns out, and I owe a tremendous amount to Bill Graham. It turns out that the Fillmore East contracts had a 50-mile exclusionary clause that you couldn't play 50 miles from the Fillmore the week of your concert. Stony Brook was 54 miles from the Fillmore.
I thought it was more than that, actually. That's amazing. So it's
I never measured it. I certainly didn't walk it, have a pedometer or anything. But I think that was the story. It was damn close to. Well, all of Long Island is only 84 miles long.
Right. No, I'm just thinking the Long Island. Anyway, the point is it just went outside the parameters.
So you could look at the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and there was always a Fillmore ad. It was a long column. I can visualize it now, a long column. And whatever the Fillmore had on Friday, we had on Saturday, and vice versa. My freshman year, before the phone rang, I was jotting this down. I tried to look it up on the internet. I was frustrated. But my freshman year, I saw B.B. King, Leonard Cohen, The Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Procol Harum, Poco, Hot Tuna with Papa John, Jefferson Starship, Jethro Tull, The Byrds, The Beach Boys, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Buddy Guy, Bobby Blue Bland, The Allman Brothers, Commander Cody, Lost Planet Ammon, Traffic, and it's not a complete list.
1970. This is when your mom let you off the leash. Then
she didn't let me. I was in Stony Brook. They came to the groups came to
me. That is. I've always waited to hear somebody riff, because there's my dad and mom marinating in like classical music. My dad's a librarian at SUNY Stony Brook. Totally missed the boat. Ziegler's marinating in this ridiculous. That's enough music for a lifetime. You saw that in one semester.
It is. And the other thing is, you walk to the gym.
Exactly.
I certainly wasn't. I mean, in my enlightened sense, I was afraid of driving under the influence. I don't think I didn't always avoid it, but it was not a good thing to do. But I was not afraid to walk under the influence or crawl under the influence. And so you could get in whatever state you wanted with your close friends that you live with, and go to just walk to these shows and be there. But the Dead, it was from the first time. It was magical. And my contract with the Dead, which I haven't been able to renew with other groups particularly, is I would come in and I would just give them my brain, and at the end of and go with them the whole way, and at the end, and they take you on a trip. To me, the whole auditorium would take off, go somewhere out of space, and it always landed in the same spot.
That's right.
When you're done, and they did that in the sense of constructing the sets, so they got you really high and everything, But by the time they were ended with a Not Fade Away or something like that, you were able to get enough of a senses to put one foot in front of the other and get out of the auditorium or something. But they the contract I have with most other bands, excellent bands, is one song at a time. Yeah, you go, one song will take you a while. And the Dead, sometimes first sets in the later years were like that. You know, they were playing tunes when you wanted to. But you would just go with them. And a corollary to that is, I think of acid, is when you do acid with people, it's like taking a hunk of your brain and putting it in a blender. Everybody takes a hunk of their brain, puts it in a blender, blends it up, and gets back an equal volume of brain, but it's a mix. It's not your own. So when you do it at a Dead show and there's thousands of people, you only have to put a little bit in.
I love, dude, that is fantastic, man. Oh.
When you're doing it with your best friend, so you put in a big hunk and he does, and you come out and it's like, wow, you really have a different level of closeness. Anyhow, so that was it. I could just go with them, take me. And then, and I got cynical at times. I learned life's lessons. I would go there with a set list I wanted. Do me. I wanted to hear more. I want to do this and that. And that took away from, because the fact of the matter is, when they were playing great, it didn't matter what the hell they played. Roll Out the Barrels was pretty good. And when they weren't, it was but one of my friends who's younger than I, Dave Kinney, he lives in Minnesota with his family. He's got twins, boys, and everything. He taught me, he was one of these deadheads that would just ecstatically dance to whatever. And the message in life is dance to the music being played. Don't, I tell myself that. Don't sit there and go, well, I didn't want to hear Nancy Jett. I would have rather heard, Weather Boy, blah, blah, blah. It's like dance to what's being, and when you did that with the Dead, it was always a payoff. Anyhow, you asked me how I got it.
Well, no, you hold on that. I got another name. This is going to tie right. I want you to hold on to that story. We got another game, another Name That Voice.
Okay.
This is better audio, so take a listen to this, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Kesey, when he even then was working on bits, that he had gotten this job at the mental hospital there in VA, the VA hospital in Menlo Park. And he was observing these people in the wards, and he was writing sketches about that. My sketches mostly were about things that I'd get involved in, like up in San Francisco at a spoken word thing where, getting up and talking and reactions to the people, and things around the campus and that. I was pretty square in that respect at that time. I hadn't really cut loose. Well, for one thing, I hadn't taken LSD yet, and Kesey did in those experiments he got involved with at the hospital, so he was already getting psychedelicized.
but you recognize that voice?
I would guess Hunter.
Close. That's a prankster, Ken Babs.
Babs, okay.
So
I've met Babs.
I mean, it's like. This again, he said it was before I did LSD. I'm more interested in when you got to San Francisco, the medical. I mean, did you do a deep dive right into neuroscience and neurology at that point? And
well, I majored at Stony Brook. I majored in physiological psych. For two reasons. One, I didn't like the pre-meds, and they were all doing bio and everything, so I needed to do pre-med requirements, but I wanted to have some escape from that. But physiological psych is the physical neurophysiology of the brain. We did rat experiments and so on and so forth. So I was always fascinated with the brain and so on. And my problem in the days that I was educated psychiatrist, I didn't think knew enough hard science.
I think you're right, man. Listen, do you know? I mean, the amount of jazz I've done 1,000. I've sent you all the Dead stuff, but I mean, I've talked to Pat Martino, great jazz guitar player, and the dude was having headaches and near meltdowns, and they immediately in the mid '70s threw him into psychiatric wards and gave him electric shock therapy. Turns out he had a tumor the size of a pear in his brain in 1980. I mean, it's just like it was almost inhumane. There was no knowledge at that time.
Well, and the foundation of neurology in France in the 1800s, Charcot went into La Salpêtrière, which was an insane asylum, and he separated functional from organic. He took out the people who had really organic illness,
right?
Whether it was syphilis or whatever, and separated that kind of stuff. The psychiatric diagnoses have to be a diagnosis of exclusion. You have to exclude all other possibilities. Grandma may be demented, but the fact of the matter is, Grandma may just have a urinary tract infection, and if you treat it, she'll be okay. And it's pretty ugly to start. I had a professor at Stony Brook. The course was sociology, courtship, sex, and marriage. I got an A+, which is maybe why I stay single. But anyhow,
no, yeah, I mean,
marriage
is hard.
His name was Selvin, and he was a brilliant man. But when I had him, he was blind. Instead of a seeing eye dog, he had a seeing eye TA and whatever it is. And he told the story that he was before he lost his vision, he was getting into these car accidents, and he was rear-ending people and whatever, and so his doctor sent him. They couldn't figure it out, and they told him the whole Freudian thing, hitting people in the rear end, and they were getting all this twisted about whatever the psychological significance of this thing was, and it turned out he was losing his vision peripherally first. He lived in a town where the streetlights were on the side, not in the center of the lane, but on the sidewalk of the old-fashioned. So if he was looking at the light to see whether it was red or green, he wasn't seeing in front of him. Or if he was looking in front of him to see the cars, he wasn't seeing the lights change, and he was getting the accidents. And it was, but
wow. I understand completely. I was a teacher of the visually impaired for 8 years, so I know exactly what you're talking. It's insane. That's kind of insane.
Yeah, but the insanity stuff is whatever. The truth is stranger than fiction. So you want me to go back to the?
Well, no. I do want that story, but I'm actually curious about how much you talked to the guys about. How much they were truly influenced by the pranksters. The beats before them, but in my mind, I was just in Eugene interviewing Babs on Facebook Live and George Walker, two of the remaining pranksters. To me, I believe that all the guys in the band were deeply affected by the pranksters, and I wasn't sure if they ever confided in you about that.
Oh, well, Neil Cassidy made a big impact. They did confide, and they talked about it. I don't want to say confided as if it was some kind of private discussion, because it's in their books. The pranksters were a big influence, and the Native American the chief, and I'm blanking on these names now.
It's okay. I'm not familiar with this. There was a Native American component to the Dead's.
Not to the pranksters, but Mickey and Billy. It's in Billy's book. He was my closest friend in the band, and I'm embarrassed that I can't remember but the pranksters had a great influence. That level of freedom and the acid tests. Because they could play or not play, or do or not do. The pranksters exuded the kind of freedom that we talked about in relation to LSD.
Absolutely.
But Cassidy did it on his own. Now I'll tell you, Kurt Vonnegut talks about Karass, people like that are in your sphere or circle you interact with. And I'll tell you a funny story, because my friends used to tease me and call me Cowboy Neil just because of the way I drove and whatever.
You had two women in the back, and you were looking at them and weren't even looking at the front of the road.
No, but the point was, my attitude was I can drive better on LSD than most people can drive on their own, and that may or may not have been true. But I was so cocky that I could talk to the cop. My attitude: the cop doesn't know me,
right?
So he doesn't have a baseline. I could walk out and deal with it. Anyhow, I'm in a medical office. I'm working in a very plush family practice office in Sunnyvale, near where I lived in the early '80s, and we had a lot of office staff. And one CJ, very beautiful, hip, younger woman, comes in, and she's got a book about Neil Cassidy, and she goes, "Hey, this is a book about my father." And I go, "You mean it's a book written by your father?" She goes, No. Neil Cassidy was my father."
Whoa.
It was like, yeah, it was, whoa. And then she told me stories about he taught me how to drive. It was very scary because he never used the brakes. He just, and Weir tells great stories about Cassidy could see around curves. He could just do things. Well, no,
in that Barlow interview, he talked about he didn't have a lot of time to hang with Cassidy, but the times that he did in the car, Cassidy would be having 3 conversations simultaneously at one time and not even looking at the road. And you're trying to figure out how are we surviving? You know,
it was amazing. Well, they just had a level of freedom. In the later years, I was in a dressing room after Jerry came out of his coma, whatever, was playing again, and Kesey, this was at Bill Graham Civic. I think it was still called San Francisco Civic then, and Kesey's talking about visiting Jerry. Kesey starts doing impersonations of the dialysis machine, the noise, the bubbling noises and everything, and he could just get away with stuff that with them and that nobody else could do. Certainly nobody else was teasing Jerry about dialysis.
Well, I mean, dude, he was cracking. He's at the Silva Halt. He's just like, be careful if you're in an altered state because it's very steep. And the joke he made about Jerry's, the fact that he wore that black shirt and he was saving on laundry bills. But actually, Melanie, I interviewed Melanie Cassidy, his daughter. She was the one that she told me about Neil's driving, his ability.
Okay.
But so again, going from fan. I mean, you weren't eating acid to go see B.B. King. The Dead were tripping.
No.
The Dead were.
Actually, yeah. I didn't. In 1970, I think I did acid like 71 the first time I did it. I didn't. It wasn't that. And there was in those days there was like hash and opiated hash and all kinds. You could get plenty altered without the hallucinogens. I mean, I got hooked on the Dead prior to acid.
Absolutely. Please tell me that Billy Kreutzmann was your first connection to the Grateful Dead.
He was.
Tell me the story. You have no idea. I've devoted hours and hours and hours of my show to Bill Kreutzmann. So go ahead. This will just be the newest thing.
So I was, I started going to shows in the 70s. I went all through the 70s. My idea of local shows was Boston, Hartford, New York, Richmond, Virginia. My father has me one day, what's this gas receipt from Richmond? I said, I told you I was going to a concert. He goes, you didn't tell me you were going to Virginia.
Oh, dude! I mean, unbelievable.
So I'm an intern at Presbyterian Hospital, California. It's not California Pacific, in Pacific Heights, and I'm living there. And
what year was this? What year?
This was in 1980.
Oh my God! What an unbelievable!
No, it was 1978. 1978.
This is great.
So I started my internship in 78. Now I always loved nurses, and my mentor in medical school, the chairman of neurology, said you have to court your nurses, meaning not Harvey Weinstein kind of courting. I mean, courting them, in other words, involving them and getting them involved in rounds, and being respectful to them and getting them, and they save your ass all the time. And when I always relied on them. If you have a good rapport with the nurses, they'll save your ass every time.
Absolutely.
They'll say, Dr. Feingold doesn't like Tylenol. He's asking this one, that one. Otherwise, some medical students come in, or interns. It's the first week of internship, but it's like, I'm the doctor, you're the nurse, and they pull rank, and it's like, well, you're a little asshole. And anyhow, there was a nurse, one of the nurses that I got friendly with. One of the nurses I got friendly with in at Presbyterian was Lisa Barsotti. And
the Barsotti brothers? Are you talking about the Barsotti, the cat?
Well, she was Bob Barsotti's wife.
I just interviewed Jerry Pompili, who is part of Bill Graham, but he's going to get me to.
Okay, well,
yeah,
that was it's a great family. They were and the Barsotti. So I didn't know Lisa I didn't know who Barsotti was. I didn't know any connection, but I had a great rapport with Lisa. She was an outstanding nurse. Intellectually and emotionally loving and caring, but just we've been really good friends. And she said to me when she goes, "You never hit me up for tickets or anything." I said, "What are you talking about?" Because there were people always. She and Bob got married at Bill's house. She told stories. She used to work the box office at the Fillmore Wonderland. She taught David. Graham had to count by counting money at the box office.
Unbelievable.
So I met Bob through Lisa, and he asked me one of the promoters' jobs is to provide whatever the artists want, and he would call me for a backstage call, and so and so. I can tell you great stories with a lot of different people. But can you go to the Cop House? Can you do this? And you drive in, and everybody's always really nice and respectful. And just kind, There's none. I didn't get any of that rock star stuff. I got that, people, because you're doing them a favor and whatever it might be. Generally speaking, the star has a sore throat or whatever it might be. The two roadies have gonorrhea and need to be treated for that. And it was like a camp doctor. You line up, and all these people line up. And then you just make up a number, and they just give you money. They just give you cash off the thing. In fact, the only time Bob Barsotti ever corrected me, took me aside and goes, "I got to tell you something." I go, "Oh shit, what are they doing?" He goes, "You got to ask for more money."
Wait, so it was just an arbitrary. It was just whatever.
You finish taking care of whoever you've taken care of. Usually, like I said, usually you call for one person, and then it's like a camp. They line up. And
I did. I went to SCAT. I went to summer camp, 14 summers, upstate New York, baby. I know exactly what that's like.
Then you go to the road manager and you just tell him a number. So Bob said to me, I was a quick learner. That was an easy criticism. He goes, "Make up a big number because you look so young. Whatever they want you to look." Very professional, so you just charge them even more money. So I did that with a lot of different groups, and I'll tell you some funny stories after I complete this task. I was with we were in Long Beach in the late '70s, early '80s. Bob was a production manager, and I was down there, and actually my little brother who was visiting was down there and everything, and we had with tickets, we had backstage passes and everything. And he said to me, he goes, would you go see Billy is in the hotel and he's not feeling well. Would you go see him? So I said, sure. So I went and so I played everything really straight, did the whole doctor thing. And afterwards, he goes, listen, if you go down the hall, Danny Rifkin's the road manager, he'll pay you whatever you want. And I said, look, Bill, I did this really straight, but you guys got me all through college. My first show was freshman year, all through medical school and residency. I can't take any money from you. Every Deadhead's great fantasy is to do something for the band, and there's nothing I'd rather do than professional services. It's just my pleasure.
Fucking
He goes, well,
awesome.
can I get you backstage passes? I said, I have backstage passes. He goes, well, would you come hang out? Would you? I said, I'll hang out. And the hook, I hope I don't think he'll mind me telling this story, but I think the magic happened. That we're sitting around that evening, and people like to pick the doctor's brain. And he says to me, he goes, hey, Doc, maybe you could tell me how LSD cured my migraines. And I said, well, actually, I can. I said, it's an ergot alkaloid. When Albert Hofmann was first working on it, they were working on it to clamp down vessels from postpartum bleeding, to get the vessels spat so bleeding. And in those days, they thought migraine was vascular contraction and expansion and everything. And so the ergot seemed to help that. Blah, blah, blah. Well, his mouth fell open. This is like a question he'd been in the back of his mind for a long, long time.
I love it.
And so that, and we just became, and we became friends on different levels. The Dead are all autodidacts. They've all self-taught in a lot of areas, and one of Billy's birthday, one of his earliest birthdays, people were always giving him dumb shit, giving him sculptures of drums and things like that. I gave him an Isaac Asimov book about how things work and whatever it might be, and he just loved it. He loved that kind of thing because he was just really inquisitive and just like a sponge for different kind of knowledge. And it manifests in a lot of ways. I mean, his knowledge of the ocean and scuba diving and everything is legendary, but other things. And so, and from there, but what happened was I never took money, and I never did the power broking thing. I was able to get passes. I had passes for friends. There was plenty of years when I had my own laminate, and I had Ross Ziegler guest 1 and guest 2. And my people were always well behaved, but it was, I met Dan that way. It was funny because the crew, the Dead were like, it's like a country. It was like a principality. There were 6 princes, but it was run by the prime ministers who were the crew. But I know most people work their way up to this for that one. You give this gift, you do this favor, and you finally meet someone. I was trickled down. I met Billy, and then met Healy, and then so it took a little while for crew people to warm up to me.
But I mean, that's still. I mean, the guy who I just interviewed the guy who made the Long Strange Trip documentary, and took. Steve Parrish treated him like a total asshole for a long time until that's just Parrish.
Was that Len Delamico? Did he do that one or
no? Yeah, this guy Amir Barlev. It's the newest one that just came out.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just so. But you would say that so I just want to be clear about this. First of all, the nurse Lisa was like, "How come you never hit me up for tickets?" And you said, "I don't need." I
didn't know. I didn't know that she had that connection. I was doing my thing.
You're doing your thing. I mean, but in general, though, so you were down.
I would get tickets like in the old days. In those days, there was no write-in for tickets. You'd go to like a Bass outlet, which was the equivalent of Ticketmaster in the Bay Area, and you sit online and you get tickets and whatever.
But each member, it was kind of like each person sort of had their own, like Billy needs you, you went to see Billy and you met Billy, but then it wasn't like, did you meet everybody in the band at that point, or was it just sort of like? Well,
so then you just, I guess, I met that guy very close to Bobby. He stayed over. I had a Thanksgiving with him. If you're once. On the outside world, they're a little bit like all celebrities. They're a little bit wary if they're just approached by a stranger. But if you're in and you're with someone else, they're very friendly people. Like, who are you about it? In fact, I remember talking to one of the drivers. We were in Canada, and they flew out the night before. Or after the show, and I was flying separately, and I couldn't fly with them because you have to have, there's a car and you have to have everything through customs, has to be listed and so on. Anyway, the long and short of it was, the driver's taking me to the airport the next day, and he goes, "Boy, those guys are great." They get in a van, they talk to the driver, "How are you? You live around here? You have kids?" They're just people.
Right.
He goes,
I dig it.
2 weeks earlier, the Rolling Stones were there. There's written instructions that include you were prohibited from making eye contact with Mick Jagger on show days. And here, these guys and the dad are like, "Hey, what are you all about, man?" They were just another because it was a safe person. They've already been cleared by whoever's hiring and doing all these other things, and so yeah.
Well, I have to just because I can't believe that you're the first time you connected with Billy Kreutzmann. I'm thinking Long Beach, 1981. They didn't play any other times there, so that was probably in 81. And then essentially, were you coming on board at a certain consistently to be sort of the neurological Swami, so to speak?
No. Just for the highest rank the dead bestow on anyone,
right,
is friend.
Oh man, you're making my year, man. I mean, you're making my year. Yeah, so that you're just a dude. You're just a friend.
If you're a friend, if you're a friend who's a plumber, at some point or another, they'll probably ask you something about hot water heaters. And if you're a friend who, and the world at large loves to pick the doctor's brain. Everybody's got a question they want to corner a doctor and talk about. And Healy once said to me, because it sort of happened quickly, and I don't remember. He goes, "I really envy your position with the band." First of all, I was getting tapes from him. He goes, "Everybody you haven't offended anybody. Everybody likes you. You're not like, because I wasn't looking to make.
You weren't a scam. You weren't scamming anybody. It was all open heart, man. You're like, how could I take money from Billy Kreutzmann? You guys you got me through a decade of the '70s, major spiritual thing.
Right, and so and then as the privileges, we access all areas. There's all areas. I mean, I've had a discussion with people, not the members of the dead organization, but you'll be at some venue, and some guy with the sport coat that belongs to whatever the equivalent of the Spectrum or the Omni is, and goes, "Well, you can't go here." I go, "Wait a second." I go, "It's an area, right? This says access all area. Just get out of my way,
Yeah, right.
kind of thing." But what I was at that point, I would much rather stand at the board than on the stage. I used to get tickets. I'd pay for seats, or I'd be comp seats. But if the seats were no good or something, I could always join Dan. Some venues were petite, like Ventura. The soundboard and the stage were at the same height, and the floor was lower.
Oh my God, that must have been wild looking.
And at the venues that were big like that, Dan had a portisan, a bathroom. So it was kind of So, but I wasn't like in the way. I wasn't somebody invariably was on the stage. When they get in their space, that's why they had little nooks and crannies on the stage. If they were in a headspace, whatever it might have been, they often don't want to. They don't want to, break that mood. You see it if you watch professional baseball. They go, "So and so's game face," or no one's sitting in the dugout next to Bumgarner or whatever it is. He's in his zone.
Or the dude
that
dude Turk Wendell used to brush his teeth in between innings, right? The guy from the Cubs. But yeah, no, I mean it's.
Right.
I'm with you. Just to be clear, Billy had migraines, but then after taking LSD, they just never occurred again.
Apparently not. That's what he just said. He just asked me, could I tell him how it helped him, and so that was that. Now I don't know if it was diagnosed as migraines, if it was vascular headache, whatever it might be. Some people use the term. I didn't analyze it as if he was in my office. Some people use the term. They think migraine means very bad headache.
How did you get? So I am absolutely blown off the map. Right, I know you were at Palo Alto shows, and obviously you go to California shows, but I just have this feeling that you were like on Spring '83 tour on the East Coast. I mean, were you taking time off from work to go on?
Well, I did whole tours. I retired from my practice in '88. I got sober and I did that in '88, and then I did like whole tours.
Well, no, so I'm talking like early '80s though. You basically stayed in the Bay Area. Is that fair to say, or did you?
Yeah, but I'm trying to think about.
Did you go to Jamaica with them?
I'd fly into New York. The thing is, when if you I don't remember exactly when it happened, but if you have a laminate or something, you don't have to.
Right.
Worry about getting sick.
Right.
You can just show up and be there.
Yeah. Unbelievable. You're using a laminate like 3 years old and you're still getting in.
Well, no, not they issue a new one for every tour.
Did you go to Jamaica, for instance, or?
I did not go to Jamaica. I did not go to Egypt. Egypt, I was still in the midst of my internship.
Yeah, that.
So
I want to ask you, as somebody who came in as a fan and who's a music. Like you dig music in general. Can you just talk about how critical Dan Healy was to getting the language of the sound to the audience members? I never saw the band.
Absolutely. Dan and I remain very close. In fact, today is Patty's birthday.
Oh, I got to call. I got to leave a message.
God. Dan is to the soundboard what Jerry is to the guitar. He there's no comparison in terms of sound engineers.
You're just talking about being able to get maximum use out of every. Can you just talk about the analogy there for peeps that might not totally get that?
Well, first of all, he studied every venue. They had a machine at the board, Dan went ultrasound, that was used to seismically to send out sound waves to check for earthquake steadiness and everything in buildings. And they would get
so he was testing this. He was testing the structural integrity of the buildings.
Not the structural integrity of the building, but in his case, he was testing how to deliver the sound.
Exactly.
Sounding the building. So in fact, he was uncanny. We were in Europe. We were staying near the Opera Plaza. We went across the street to the to the Opera House in Paris, which is like the Jewish Sistine Chapel. Marc Chagall painted the ceiling and everything, and I'm entranced by the art and everything. And he's showing me, walking around the hall, clapping his hands and showing me where you get an echo and where you don't, and what and so he was absolutely committed and successful, like no one else, delivering as perfect a sound as possible to everybody in the auditorium or the hall or the field or whatever it might be.
Go ahead.
And just what I'm saying is that, people would have said, Jerry could do things with the guitar that few people could possibly do. And I feel the same way with the soundboard with Dan. And his ear was amazing. We were sitting at the board once. Where the hell were we? I don't know. The Indigo Girls were going to open for the Dead. It was one of those big stadium things. It might have been Vegas. I don't remember.
Right.
And they had their own sound guy was at the board, whatever it is. And Dan and I are in a conversation like you and I are. All of a sudden, he goes to the guy and he says something, does something like that, and the guy's mouth falls open. He just drastically improved the whole sound of the Indigo Girls as a sort of an incidental thing that he's hearing in the midst of a conversation.
Well, what's really remarkable, I mean, is that, like he told me, before, whatever, you had these raspy music used to just come out of a PA system, it would just, be very hard, there was no real quality to it. But then as the technology advanced, it was really about getting the sounds that were inside each one of these guys' heads, and they were all different, to merge and then come out and just soak the audience.
No one else ever put out a stereo sound. It was true stereo for much of all the touring.
They were the first ones to do a stereo sound in a live set.
I don't know if he was the first. I mean, I'm not the historian, but he did it. I mean, he wasn't the first at what he did. He was the best at. He was the only one who did.
He's the only one who did it. Exactly. I think that's the greatest line in the world.
Although you had that on your email. I don't know that as a Garcia quote. I don't know where you. It was Bill Graham put that on one of the floats for one of his New Year's pageants, and he said it, but he stole it from one of his employees that was talking about the Dead. He goes, "They're not the best at what they do. They're the only ones that do what they do." Right,
and they're the only one. And
Jerry probably just repeated it.
Well, no, but this
whatever it might be.
Yeah, I know. I'm with you. I forget where I read that, but. All that resonates with me is that be the only one in the world who does what you do. That's what I dig about that. And
right.
Did you so basically you were just to be very clear here, you were a huge fan, became very friendly with the band, but you only did that original house call with Billy, or did you have other engagement?
I did other medical stuff. Jerry and Bobby have made office visits. Billy's made office visits when I was, and over the years I did things here and there. He's talking about Dan, and I'll tell you one of the greatest compliments I was ever paid is Dan says to me about a year or so into my being in the scene and everything. He goes, I didn't think I could trust you as a doctor because philosophically you seem so close to our headspace, and all the other doctors were.
That's right. So classic.
And which is a tremendous compliment. But what Dan made the flip that he doesn't trust any doctor like he trusts me. I mean, I've had some funny phone calls. He was in Oregon or somewhere. He broke his arm. They showed him the X-ray. You can see the bone broken. And the doctor goes, "Listen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I got a guy in the ER. He won't let me touch him until I talk to you." So, and again, because it wasn't about the money and the power and the whatever it is. So but anybody that you're close with over the years, if you're a medical person, you're going to do medical things for them. I'm just very, very. There's no such thing as a doctor for the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead had band members and crew members. Where they didn't have, just where in every town the promoter would provide whatever they had to provide. And but I did I did things for crew. I did things for other people. I do what I love to do, and that was how it is. But it was definitely reassuring. To this day, still with the Healys, Dan or Patty will call up and say, "Listen, I'm going through this and this. I just want your opinion or whatever it is," and I'm flattered and happy to do that.
I just like your vibe is so. It's just so great to know that there are people that are not up, that are genius doctors that are not uptight. What year did you move to San Francisco?
I moved to San Francisco, and I graduated medical school in 1978. I moved there in June. I moved there in 78 and started my internship and residency. I lived in Pacific Heights, Broadway and Franklin, and then in 80 I moved down to Palo Alto to continue neurology residency at Stanford.
Going on this. I want to read you this quote, and then it's a little bit before you moved out there, but you seem to be able to vacillate very well between private practice and then also giving of yourself. Now, you were very giving of yourself within the dead community, but I want to read this to you. This is from one of Bill Graham's guys, Jerry Pompili. He said,
"Okay, no, I know Jerry."
Yeah, he goes, "We were doing a bunch
he doesn't know me. I mean, I know him or whatever."
Well, I mean, this guy goes back. He started at the Fillmore East before your mom would let you go to shows. So a couple of years. He goes,
right.
He goes, "We were doing a bunch of shows in the 70s at Winterland, which held over 5,000 people. We always had problems with the shows with drugs and alcohol. It was a finite number of problems and depended on the kind of show you had. The heavier the show, the more problems you tended to have. Every once in a while, we would do a show at the Cow Palace. The Cow Palace was 3 times the size of Winterland. But the funny thing I noticed almost from the start was that we didn't have 3 times the number of problems. We had 9 times the number of problems. It became a geometric progression with medical-type problems. Bill Graham booked this show at Kezar Stadium with Zeppelin in 73. This capacity was 50,000. I'm running the numbers in my head, and I'm thinking, oh, shit, this could really be a big problem. I went into Bill's office. Usually when I went into Bill with an idea, the first thing he would say is, how much will it cost? Unless it involved the safety of the audience. I went into him and gave him all these numbers and said, what can he do? What can we do? He picked up the phone. He called Dave Smith at the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic and says, I'm going to send my guy over to you to explain what we need. He never asked me how much it would cost. David Smith asked 2 of his doctors, Skip Gay and Daryl Inaba, and they put together this whole rock medicine thing.
Rock Med. Yeah,
rock Med.
I know all those guys, and I know them. Yeah.
No. Okay, so that was literally like a month ago. I did that interview on the radio. Now I know that. What kind of rock medicine did you take part in, if at all, or what was the lineage of that once you got out there?
Well, I didn't. They were pretty well established. Rock Med. I didn't volunteer or work with them. I was taking care of the artists as opposed to the.
You were taking care of the artists,
audience.
But I mean, you were taking care of the artists during real time before the shows at the they weren't coming to your hospital or something like that.
No. But you get a call. You'd have to go before. I'll tell you a great story. Pat Metheny was playing up in San Francisco, and Jaco Pastorius was playing the bass.
Oh yeah.
And whatever, and Jaco is amazing. So Pat's an amazing musician too. Pat has some very normal kind of infection, I don't know, a virus or sore throat or something, whatever. And I took care of him. I drove in before the show. I took care of him, and Jaco comes up to introduce. He goes, "I'm Jaco." I said, "I know just who you are." And he puts his arm around me, and he says, "You got to help my friend Pat. He's got a real fast food addiction. Jaco, who's got this terrible heroin problem, just wants me to get Pat Metheny off of Big Macs."
I love it.
I mean, but
I mean, how would you deal without mentioning names or anything? Like, I mean, heroin was so prevalent at that. I mean, was there a quick fix for people that were having hard times with maybe they didn't have heroin, or I mean, how would you ease them to get through the night?
I didn't. The people I didn't really come across that.
Interesting.
I didn't come across. I'm not saying that I wasn't aware of people in a band smoking something. There was really no needle use or anything like that.
No, totally. But I mean, like you said, you would say like Matheny, he had a sore throat, or but I mean,
right.
You take care of that. I mean, how does?
Well, I think. Well, the promoters were very smart. They think if they got someone who's strung out on opiates and needs opiates, they didn't call a doctor. They had other people that provided that kind of stuff. Yeah, you cut out the middle. I mean, that was whatever.
I want
to.
This is really important. This is like so important, Ziegler. Like again, going back to your early. This is going back to Stony Brook days, 72 or so, with the Stan Getz documentary. This drummer Alan Schwartzberg told me that he tried out for the band, made the gig, and Stan had a 2-week gig at Ronnie Scott's and in London, and Alan got to the gig. They all flew out there, and then before the show started, Stan went to a doctor in England because you could prescribe cocaine at the time. These house doctors could prescribe it. And for constipation or maybe depression, I don't even know. Stan dumped this prescription bottle of cocaine on the table and just proceeded to blow through it. And then the funny thing is, at the first set, he played like 2 tunes and talked to the audience the whole time. I don't think it worked. But what was it like? It was so easily accessible that a doctor could prescribe a prescription for cocaine. Was that something that went on?
That was not in the United States.
How come it was even justified in European medicine? That it's mind blowing to me.
Well, it was a great drug. Freud wrote a book called The Cocaine Papers that talks about. He thought it was a panacea. He thought it was not only going to cure melancholia but diabetes and everything. There is a wine called Van Mariani. It was a French wine, which had cocaine in the wine, and there was a book published of laudatory letters to the vintner from Van Mariani. It was from Sarah Bernhardt, 2 popes, the head rabbi of France, Thomas Edison, all these people. I love your wine; it gives vigor, this, that, and whatever. So it was a good drug that way. Medically speaking, it was the only drug that is both an anesthetic and a vasoconstrictor.
What's a vasoconstrictor?
It takes blood vessels and constricts them. Now, if you go to the dentist nowadays and they're going to do something, they'll give you lidocaine with epinephrine.
Right.
The epinephrine clamps the vessels down. The lidocaine makes things numb so they can go ahead and do things. It's good for dental work. It's good for anal and hemorrhoidal things and things like that. So, but cocaine was preferable to that, but it became so problematic, the hospital stopped even carrying it. They stopped it because
hospitals in Europe.
Well, hospitals in the United States. I'm not familiar with the European deal, but because it became attractive for theft and so on.
Oh my God! So I mean, what years was it officially out of hospitals? I mean, when you went to Sunnydale, or I'm sorry, in the late 70s, was cocaine still available in hospitals?
It was available in hospitals in 78, 79, 80. Aerosol. They had liquid form. You would spray it in the back of someone's throat if you're going to put them on a ventilator or something. I had an old lady once. She had bad lung disease. So we were going to do what was called a elective intubation. It wasn't like an emergency, like a code, but we're going to numb up the back of your throat and put her on a ventilator so we could start breathing. So we got aerosolized coke. We sprayed the whole thing, and she goes, "This is wonderful. why didn't you guys give me this drug sooner?
Where have you been my whole life, dude?"
So and this is she's probably 78 years old or whatever. It was not that. So, but then they stopped. Having that around. The pharmacist didn't want to have it because it became a liability. So I didn't follow that. It was prescribed in those days. In fact, one of the surgeons got into a lot of trouble with it. He was a colorectal surgeon. I mean, he was a top-notch guy. He trained at Memorial Sloan Kettering about colorectal cancers, and he came out of San Francisco, and he wound up doing a lot of foreign body in the rectum thing from the gay community, and cocaine is a very good drug for that area because of the vasoconstriction and whatever. And but he wound up with his own problems with it. So it's just. I mean, the government is got a hair trigger about removing things that way. It's just but they're stupid. That's how the opiate crisis is the pharmaceutical industry manipulating Congress and with all these prescriptions, and limiting their. There was a 60 Minutes a few weeks ago about limiting the DEA. I mean, there's a town like 4,000 people that had 600,000 OxyContin pills going through some pharmacy, and nobody was allowed to go in and say, listen, we this is not right. Something's not right here. It's crazy stuff.
Well, okay. I mean, we're going to wrap up set one. We
Okay.
have, but I want to play this one more audio clip for you. And then have you come back and extrapolate on it, and
Okay.
and then that'll be Let It Grow, and we'll call it a day. Hold on.
Okay, good.
Sure. I mean, I haven't really spoken to too many other people who've grown up, with an addict, but it's something. Every person's different, of course, but he obviously, Jerry obviously loved music so much that's where he lived. That's where he breathed. He was out of water when he wasn't, playing and plugged in and doing that. So even in his most worst condition, he would have been worse off if he wasn't playing. And it's always been a marvel to me that he would, that he had, at first I thought it was a work ethic. I was like, oh my God, even somebody this blasted is going to show up to work. It's amazing. Like,
Right.
What kind of work ethic? But then I realized it's not work ethic, really. It was more that he just couldn't exist without it. It was like more of an addiction than an addiction. And
That's very good. Well, it's very well. I mean, a lot of musicians, whether they're addicted to drugs or not, they say if they don't play, they would die. So that's the,
Right.
that's the
And
truth. Yeah.
So I think that's really what kept him going and pushed him beyond human normal positions. And he wanted to continue pulling those strings out of his guts, and he did it for himself and for everybody else, and left an amazing pile of music behind him. And it's so great that they did it so backwards and. Would just play live and let people record them and then pull out an album later after they polished everything up as much as they wanted. They did it backwards. They did it their way. And
All right, I'm not going to have you guess on that. That is Sunshine Kesey. As a
Interesting.
Mountain Girl and Ken's daughter. But she grew up with Jerry. Really, I mean, she grew up.
Sure.
When Jerry was in Stinson Beach with all the Olden and the Waycats. I mean, they were doodling on paper at 6 a.m. when he would come in from the shows. But I mean, just in your own, like, can you give an accurate depiction for me? I'm just like you said. Sometimes you'd go to a show and you'd want to hear Tennessee Jet and they'd be playing Mexicali Blues or something, whatever. For me, how did Jerry live in 83 and 84? I mean, by all accounts, he had edema in his ankles and wrists. His cholesterol was and I'm like, wow, how and that's my favorite time I love the music of that time. I can't explain why. There's something so raw about it, and I'm just wondering. Not that you played a role as a doctor per se, but
right.
What was the vibe? I mean, this is before, because once Touch of Grey came in, once In the Dark came in, they became pop stars. They were still playing like Sheds in 83 and 84, and yet. I mean, I remember reading one of I think Phil's book, and he told Hunter on one of these tours that Jerry was going on with John Conn. May God please save. They knew it just couldn't. I mean, what was your take on that whole thing? I mean, he was. I don't. He was like he should have been dead.
Well, I heroin in and of itself, I mean, smoking is a problem, but morphine, the active ingredient in heroin, is not that toxic to the body compared to other. I mean, the addicts die from the adulterates. You know, in fact, there's a wonderful book you ought to read. It's called Anatomy of an Addiction, and it talks about Freud and Halsted. Halsted was the father of modern surgery, the original chairman of surgery at Johns Hopkins University. Both of them ended their cocaine addictions by using morphine and lived many years and died as morphine addicts. And so it's not, I mean, it doesn't have the kind of wear and tear in the body that cocaine has and whatever. It's certainly not like speed. You know, and edema, people walk around with edema all the time. I mean, I saw. So it's hard. You say, how could someone survive or not? And yet he did. So I don't know. It's so true about the music. He was always. I mean, in the dressing rooms where he was always noodling with the guitar, and it just kind of he was the music. It went through him. It came from somewhere from without him, and he processed it and did whatever.
You would go to the Stone and see Garcia Band with Con. You knew,
yeah.
You knew Johnny Con. Yeah. Did you know Con well?
No, but there were nights. I lived near Keystone, Palo Alto, and in the Stone in the city. And
oh my God, you live near Keystone, Palo Alto. Unbelievable, Ziegler. Unreal,
but there were nights when I would go. That was like an intimate little venue. Oh. I said, this is not fair. I did more hits than he played songs. I did 10 hits after, and he played 8 songs. This is like ridiculous. This is but let me. We can do this again. You passed anyway.
Oh, no, and also I just want to be before I let you go. You did co-write this book called The Children's Place at the heart of all.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start up set 2. I'm glad I passed. Set. I'm glad
I'm gonna tell you. I'll tell you 2 things. Do you have to cut it off at this instant?
No. Let's do it. Go ahead.
I'll answer a question that you haven't asked, but that everybody wants to know.
Okay.
And that is, how do you account for the fan loyalty? The people that go to 3 shows in a row or all the shows or whatever it might be, as compared to other bands that sell as many tickets, but they don't. People don't go to U2 3 nights in a row, or the Stones for that matter, really. You know, and the simplistic level as well, that most of these groups have just an A and a B show. Even their quips are the same. They don't even change everything, and the dead are different every single night. But the fact of the matter is that the hardest behaviors to extinguish are those that come on a variable reinforcement schedule.
I love it.
Like a slot machine.
Yep.
The dead, when it happened, when they were on, the Phil talks about it, whatever it is, it was you could take anybody there. You're the Pope, and it would go, that was really something. But you never knew. It could happen 3 nights in a row. It could happen 1 night and then not 2, and you never knew when it was going to happen or not. So you didn't miss anything. You just you couldn't extinguish that behavior. Which is.
Well, I mean, I just listening to interviews with Garcia too. You know, they'd say, "Well," he'd say, "That's neat." You know, you play the same thing every night. That bores me to death. I mean, these guys
right.
were to me, Ziegler, for you to be able to actually have the force, just I don't know what the right word is, the humbleness to understand, where you were as a fan, as a professional, and to be able to sit here and talk to me in these abstractions and do it so articulately is just, it is a high honor to connect with you, man, because all I'm trying to do is inspire people in this day and age. I look at what you said before about that 60 Minutes thing with this big pharma pummeling small town America with all these I mean, people are dropping out. There's also the most overlying theme of this entire interview is it's the demystification of the superhuman. All the Grateful Dead guys, they were just people. And we've gotten into this thing. It started with My Generation and Guitar Hero in the 80s. It just started. You start to blow up what people are. They become superhuman. We call them rock stars or musicians. The Dead hated that stuff. They couldn't stand that crap. They didn't like that stuff. And that's all I'm trying to get at, is that we are all fallible. A man is just a man, as Barlow said. And that's really what I'm trying to get back to. And I think part of it has to do with some of the psychedelic drugs and the ideas that there was an open-mindedness and a freedom. And for you to be able to wax poetic about it today, I mean, dude, you made my year, man. So I look forward to set 2.
Oh, great. I'm delighted. I read, there's an article I just read in Tricycle. It's a Buddhist magazine. And the theme was a sign that was over a meditative retreat. And it said, "We are learning to become nobody special."
Yeah.
Which is just what you're talking
well,
about.
and the problem, and the only issue I have is that, that's people that are going to these Buddhists, they're already sort of in it. And the thing is now is what were the pranksters about? It wasn't about peace and love. It was about an aggressive pranksterism that allowed people to actually get dosed for their own good. And a lot of people needed that for for compromise, for consciousness. It's a discussion for another time. Happy Hanukkah.
Well, we'll talk again.
Yeah, much love. Yeah, I'm gonna eventually come visit you too, man. We're gonna catch a hand.
Well, that sounds good. Send me whatever this is, because I promised Patty today that I'd send it to her and Dan or something like that, or the link for it.
Okay, I'm gonna
and track me down, and we'll do it again.
Much love, Ziegler. Happy Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Later.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Ross Ziegler, neurologist and a mind-blowing purveyor of the Grateful Dead's music, and he lived it. He was there, and we had a ball. And that's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll be back as soon as possible. Until then, peace.